mentioned, my name is Kurt Meyer. I'm a board member of the Mitchell County Historic Preservation Association, the organization that is sponsoring this exhibit. I want to thank my fellow members, Penny, and certainly Mary, where are you? Mary, back here, who helped me set up. It was magnificent to have their help. I also want to thank John Sparrow. John is the photographer that took these photographs that you see over here of Mitchell County churches. Yeah, that's right. Kind of over reasonably near 20. He lives and works in Osage. He does a wonderful job of photography, and he's also a great joy to work with. He's got great talent and a great personality. And I also want to thank the Good Samaritan Society, our partners in this display, and certainly Steve has been a trooper here. Good Samaritan Society has been most accommodating, and we are very grateful to them for use of this space for the time of this exhibit. I am not an artist, and no, I am not a hoarder. Truth be told, I do not even consider myself a true collector, someone who's likely to have much greater focus on what is gathered in. I am, however, what I call an accumulator. and not too terribly long ago, maybe a dozen years or so, I began to accumulate art and artifacts. Things that I found interesting, things that spoke to me, a reminder of an experience, a scene that I savored, a treasured memory. Eventually, when you have enough material, categories start to emerge. I noticed, for example, that I had many artworks that featured fish and fowl, and certainly consistent with my interest in nature. So, in working with the Mitchell County Environmental Education Foundation a year or two ago, I mounted an exhibit of works numbering some 85 pieces that were on display at the county's Nature Center west of Osage. In a similar manner, encouraged by friends of mine, and it didn't take much encouragement, I have in recent years assembled a couple of art exhibits for a small museum in Dassel, Minnesota. One exhibit was related to corn, and yes, I have a corn art collection. And Dassel was once a corn hybrid center. And then one consisting largely of Midwestern landscapes. I pulled these displays together, and it brought me great pleasure to do so. And I'd like to think others found enjoyment in these exhibits as well. As I did this, however, I got to thinking, perhaps I should consider doing something similar, consistent with a sacred theme. And some of which I'll be touching on this afternoon grew out of that initial thought. Again, art in my life brings me great pleasure. In some cases, really joy that is from, radiating from the core of my being. I hope that you sense, perhaps even gain a portion of my joy during our time together this afternoon. Let me touch on a motivation for both artist and art accumulator. That is, humans are very bound in time. Perhaps art began when humans began to be aware that art can overcome time. Now, what do I mean? When an experience is captured in a work of art, it lives on with an immediacy surpassing even the keenest memory and enables us to live through it again and again and again. Art builds these bridges between past, present, and future. I've come to accept the fact that I am probably in the second half of life. We can discuss whether it's the third quarter or the fourth quarter, but I think I'm probably past halftime. What does this mean? With minimal care, the art that you see here will outlast me. Meaning, I'm not an art owner, but I'm an art steward. Can anyone, even the artist, him or herself, truly own a work of art? The simple joy of imagining these objects at some point being displayed by my children, my as of yet non-existent grandchildren, or perhaps somewhat younger friends, perhaps even children of my younger friends, well, suffice it to say, it gives me great pleasure. I imagine this conversation in the year 2050, when I hope and assume there will still be an appreciation of interesting art among people that I have never met. Where did you get this painting, someone will say. Oh, my parents had a friend, that would be me, who gave them this painting shortly before he died, assuming that I'm dead by the year 2050, and I may not be. And when my parents moved south last year, they gave it to me, and I had it reframed and placed over the mantel last week. Tell me about your parents' friend, that person would say. I just described for you a small piece of immortality, like the tail of a kite soaring in the wake of art. Let me say here at the onset, I firmly believe that the best presentations about art raise as many questions as they answer. So my goal today is to encourage you toward what I think is a vitally important habit. That is of closely examining and, yes, questioning what you see, since most works of art are open to multiple interpretation. Probably more than any other field of art, sacred artworks rely on symbols. A burning candle, for example, is a symbol of an all-seeing God. The meaning of the cross, or a crown of thorns, this is something that's recognized throughout the Western Christian world. The symbolism of eyes, are they pointed up? Are they pointed out? Are they pointed down? Up in supplication, down in reflection, out in connection with the world. Generally speaking, meaning for an artwork originates from one or more of four potential sources: the intent of the artist, the attributes of the artwork itself, the social, historical, or political context of the work, and then, of course, its reception, the viewer's understanding of it. It's this fourth area, our understanding and interpretation of an object, that is my focus today. Much of what I will say falls into the category of opinion, in some cases merely an educated guess. Bear in mind, I did not speak to the creative artists behind any of these works. And again, I welcome your thoughts. We are all entitled to our opinions about artworks, but we must also recognize the limitations of our own opinions. Welcoming yours, as I will do later, recognizes and accepts the limitations of mine. Pablo Picasso, one of the greatest artists of the 20th century, mocked those who wanted to understand his art. Everyone wants to understand art, said Picasso. Why not try to understand the song of a bird? Oh, but it's fun, Pablo. One of the remarkable aspects of modern living is the degree to which we depend on visual communication. A countless number of images enter our consciousness, day in and day out, and frankly, much of it is junk. Given the overwhelming number of machine-made objects in our environment, a work of art or of craft constitutes one of the very rare personal products made from beginning to end by an individual according to his or her own tastes, choices, and abilities. In art and in craftsmanship, the individual is free. Anything well made by human hands has personal, perhaps even spiritual, value in our mechanized era. Art is an expression of personality at its very core. The best works of art possess a reasonable degree of complexity. They challenge us intellectually. They sustain our interest. My task of explaining a work is often not as important as that of exploring a work, which I had to do in preparation for today, and which, as I mentioned, brought me considerable pleasure. In that process of exploration, the mystery, the excitement, the spirit of discovery all bubble to the surface. To look at a work of art with fresh eyes, to venture out on this voyage, can be a very rewarding task. There's no telling what one might bring back from such a journey. Because it's fun, Pablo. That's why we do it, because it's fun. The scriptures tell us very little about the appearance of Jesus, just a few hints. And we know that God himself cannot be visualized in human form. The images that we have in our minds of Christ, of God, these images were created and implanted in our hearts and minds by artists, men and women of varying talents. Some think to deviate from our traditional imagery of Christ or of God is blasphemy. I'll touch on this in a few minutes. For some of these items do indeed deviate, at least from a Western perspective. But first, a bit of church history. In the 4th century AD, Emperor Constantine created great basilicas, but decorating them became a real issue of contention. At one point, nearly all Christians agreed there must be no statues in the house of God, since statues were too much like those graven images and heathen idols that were specifically condemned in the Bible. Beliefs about painting, however, were a little bit more varied, a bit of a gray area. For early artists, the more lifelike an image was, the more it was like the actual biblical character, the more it was felt the artist was sinning against the commandment forbidding images. The earliest Christian art never showed Christ himself. There are many phases of religious art where symbols predominate. Everything not strictly left, or not strictly relevant, was left out in an effort aimed at clarity and simplicity, which were much higher priorities than faithful imitation. Then along comes Pope Gregory the Great, who lived in the 6th century AD. He took an approach that Christian art was useful, not sinful. How was it useful? It reminded the congregation of teachings they had received and kept the memories of sacred episodes alive. Pope Gregory noted that many church members could neither read nor write. To teach them, to reach them, images were as useful as pictures are in a book for children. Quoting Pope Gregory, painting can do for the illiterate what writing does for those who can read. He is basically the patron saint of Christian painting. But if Gregory's desired purpose was to be advanced, the story had to be told as clearly and as simply as possible, without anything that might divert us from the core message. I mentioned Constantine earlier and decorating. Everything in the church had a function and expressed an idea connected with church teachings. The aim of religious art in the Middle Ages was to provide a sermon in pictures, to proclaim sacred truths, as determined, of course, by the church. A great crisis then is brought about by the Reformation, when my Protestant forebears objected to pictures or statues of saints in churches, seeing them as signs of idolatry, and of course, blaming the Pope. When in doubt, blame the Pope. Simply stated, the more Protestants railed against this outward show in churches, the more the Roman Church sought to enlist the power of art. More than just reading those that couldn't read, reaching those who couldn't read, art was seen as helping persuade and convert those who perhaps had read too much. Artists were called upon to transform churches into grand showpieces whose splendor and vision almost literally swept you off your feet. Details were less important than the overall effect. Rituals were elevated, a foretaste of the glory of paradise. Artists were not motivated by earthly glory, but by the glory of God. Perhaps you've heard the story of the 3 stonemasons. On a foggy autumn day nearly 800 years ago, a traveler happens upon a large group of workers adjacent to the river Avon in Great Britain. Despite being tardy, for an important rendezvous, curiosity convinces this specific traveler that he should inquire about their work. With a slight detour, he moves toward the first of the three tradesmen and says, "My dear fellow, what is it you are doing?" The man continues his work and grumbles, "I am cutting stones." Realizing the mason did not want to engage in conversation, the traveler moves forward to the second of the three and repeats the question. To the traveler's delight, this fellow stops his work and ever so briefly states that he is a stone cutter. He adds, "I came to Salisbury from the north to work. As soon as I earn 10 quid, I will return home." The traveler thanks the second mason, wishes him a safe journey back home, and began to head to the third person in this trio of masons. When he reaches the third person, he once again asks the original question, "What is it you are doing?" This time the worker pauses, glances at the traveler until they make eye contact, and then he looks skyward, drawing the traveler's eyes upward. The third mason says, "I am a mason and I'm building a cathedral." He continued, "I've journeyed many miles to be part of the team that is constructing this magnificent structure. I have spent many months away from my family. I miss them dearly. However, I know how important Salisbury Cathedral will be someday, and I know how many people will find sanctuary and solace here. I know this because the bishop once told me his vision for this great place. He described how people would come from all parts of the world to worship here. He also told that the cathedral would not be completed in our days, but that the future depends on our hard work." He paused and said, "So I'm prepared to be away from my family because I know it's the right thing to do. I hope one day my son will continue in my footsteps, and perhaps even his son, if need be." The items on display here, tables and around the room, were for the most part, in my mind, created by people who thought like this third stonemason. Soli Deo Gloria, glory to God alone. Our thinking and feeling influences our visual impressions, just as these visual impressions influence our religious thoughts and feelings. For example, a religious picture on a calendar on the wall, seen by a youngster before he or she really has had the advantage of a religious education program, may very well shape that young person's mental image of Christ long before they've had anything definite in terms of Christian education. Because art has this power. Let me spend a few minutes talking about some of the visual impressions that are on display here today. The first one I want to call to your attention is this one right over here. And it is not a particularly religious painting, this one right here, but it was done by an artist who I'm very fond of. It's probably the only artist that I know. And he labeled it in such a way that I know that he had religious thought. It's labeled, "The strength of the hills is his also." That's from Psalm 95. "O come, let us sing to the Lord, let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before his presence with thanksgiving and make a joyful noise to him with songs. For the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods. In his hand are the deep places of the earth. The strength of the hills is his also." This was done by Orville Running, who was chair of the art department at Luther College when Paula and I attended in the early to mid-1970s. But it wasn't until Orv retired from teaching that he did most of his creative work. He passed away a few years ago, at or near the age of 100. One Saturday morning now, perhaps a dozen years plus ago, Paula bought 5 or 6 paintings from Orv, who had retired and was then living in Decorah. Orv was comfortably, at this point in his mid to late 80s, virtually blind from macular degeneration. Paula sought him out for the express purpose of buying some of his magnificent woodcuts. We have, I think, 9 of them. and treasure them greatly. He was especially pleased with his momentary surge of income, although he wanted to know, what will your husband say when he finds out about all of this? Paula assured him that I would be just fine with these purchases. In fact, I would be delighted. He then proposed to Paula that the two of them should go out for lunch to celebrate. Paula says, this is a great idea. Where would you like to go? Well, said Orr, how about Hardee's? Paula said she thought they could do a little better than Hardee's. So they ended up dining at the cafe at Vesterheim, there in the Norwegian American Museum in Decorah. Today, one of our running woodcuts has this thoughtful note taped to the back of the frame, a thank you generated by this purchase and lunch date that Paula went on. I want to talk a minute. There are a number of crosses that are on display, and you'll see them laying on tables and the like. Most of them, not all of them, are empty crosses. This is the fact that I and most Lutherans tend to emphasize the Easter element of the story rather than the Good Friday element of the story. The cross could not hold Christ. I prefer the simple empty cross, although there are exceptions in my accumulation. But grab that one. This is a magnificent example of an exception. But you'll notice something very distinct about this. This is not a Norwegian hanging from this cross. This is a black man hanging from this cross. And as much as we tend to think that we were created in God's image, basically in many cases, we project our image onto God, and in some cases, onto Christ. This is a magnificent example. I don't know if this was made in Africa. It was certainly made with an Africa purchase in mind. So it's a good example of a crucifix as opposed to an empty cross. And there are one or two others that you'll see in the you got it in the collection here, so or in the accumulation. I want to call your attention to Penny. Would you grab for me the dove, which is on that corner? Thank you. This is an interesting piece. This carved dove. It reminds me of Matthew 3:16. And when Jesus was baptized, immediately he went up from the water, and behold, the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and coming to rest on him. It's an interesting piece in part because of where the nail holes are on the back. The nail holes, as you see, are right here. This is the descending dove, not an ascending dove. Human beings want to make the Spirit going up from us to the heavens. In reality, it's coming down. It's from the heavens to us. That's an important theological difference. I think also of Acts 2. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place. And suddenly a sound came from heaven like the rush of a mighty wind, and it filled the house where they were sitting. And there appeared to them tongues as of fire, distributed and resting on each of them. And they were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. Of course, one thing that Pentecost does is reverse the scattering that took place at the Tower of Babel, where languages or tongues were confused. And obviously, the artist here has a suggestion of flame, the suggestion of flame in the tail of the dove. Thank you. My very capable assistant Penny here. St. Francis. I want to hold up St. Francis here for a moment. This is by a well-known artist named, I'm blanking, Buckley Moss, P. Buckley Moss. This is St. Francis. Not the current Pope, but rather St. Francis of Assisi. Well known for his love of nature. He also loved people and wished to share the gospel of Christ with them. The bird that he's holding here represents his love of nature, but it's also a symbol of the human soul, many of which he changed during his holy life and during his example. One story tells how St. Francis stopped on a journey to preach to a field of birds, imploring them to sing God's praises at all times, at which they flew away singing. Note, the bird here is clearly singing. There is a carving at this table. This is a powerful, small carving, and I'll have Penny pass this around too, but here you see the crown of thorns that Jesus is wearing, reminding us that Christ is indeed a king. What the Roman soldiers meant here as a mockery was, in fact, a picture of Christ's two roles. First, the suffering servant, and second, the conquering Messiah. There's further symbolism in this crown of thorns. When Adam and Eve sinned, bringing evil into the world, a curse upon the world, part of the curse upon humanity was, "Cursed is the ground because of you, in pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life, thorns and thistles it shall bring for you." So here again, the symbolism, and here Christ in a strong reaching pose, reaching out to the sick. I'll contrast that with another piece in just a moment. The Stations of the Cross piece right here. This is the true meaning of IHS here. It's the first three letters of the Greek spelling of the holy name of Jesus. The insignia is nothing more and nothing less than the symbol of his holy name. So IHS means Jesus here. Notice in here the prominence of the weapon, and the fact that it hasn't yet broken off is almost the most remarkable thing about this, because I throw it in a bag and I bring it down here, and so it's a little fragile, but it's also kind of glued in or onto the piece. But it does remind us of the prominence of the weapon. The Stations of the Cross are a Catholic devotion which commemorates the passion and death of our Lord Jesus Christ. Each of the 14 stations represents an event which occurred during the passion and death at Calvary on Good Friday. The stations were originally performed many centuries ago by Christian pilgrims who visited the Holy Land and the sites of Jesus' passion. Promotion then of the devotion of the stations began in earnest with the Franciscans, again named after St. Francis, who were given custody of these holy places in the Holy Land in the 1300s. Many Catholics have enriched their spiritual lives with this powerful devotion of the Stations of the Cross. During the time of the Crusades, roughly 1100 to 1270, it became popular for pilgrims in the Holy Land to walk in the footsteps of Jesus to Calvary. After the Muslims then captured the Holy Land, pilgrimages were too dangerous. So as a result, the Stations of the Cross became a substitute for what was once a pilgrimage. The stations represented critical events on Good Friday, and were originally done outdoors, but then were brought inside the churches in the mid-1800s, and eventually the number of stations was fixed at 14. We are all part of this scene, as you can see it. We are brought into this scene sort of as a passive observer. And what brings us in is this mounted soldier that's kind of right at the front. We're seeing over his shoulder. We're brought into the scene. Christ here is in white, emphasizing his purity and his innocence. The scene bleeds off beyond the frame. The frame cannot contain the entire scene. What does that suggest? The saga continues. On to the next station. There's more here. I only have this one station, but that's what we would do if we were representing the different stations. Thank you. Can you kindly bring me the far painting at that table? Right there. Right there. That one. Yeah, that one. Bring that over. This is entitled Return of the Prodigal, and it's by a fellow named Joseph O'Connell. He's no longer with us. O'Connell is not. He was a sculptor, a printmaker, a photographer, an artist in residence and teacher at the College of St. Benedict's and St. John's University from 1962 to 1995. And you can see in this painting, there is a great deal going on here. There's this horizontal crossbar. The cross is represented. There's the centrality of the hands, the positioning of the hands, the movement in the son's hands. The son, upon being hugged, his hands are shaking like this. Is that in defiance? We don't really know. There's the heavenward gaze of the son. The son is looking to the heavens. And the downward gaze of the father. Then there's the father's teeth. The father has his teeth showing. What's that about? I don't know. There's the father's embrace. Is it smothering? Is it holding him too close? There's sprigs of plant life in the background. That probably represents sort of the undying nature of the story, the evergreen nature of this story. And then there are two forms lurking in the background. Perhaps the older son, I don't know. There are various planes and beams and facets, lights and shadow. The son wears white, the father wears black. I think this artist has a very interesting take on this old Bible chestnut, and I would encourage you to look closely at this particular painting. I'm not sure how to interpret it, but here again, I would encourage you to have your own interpretation of what O'Connell, a Catholic artist, a very talented man, was aiming at. I want to lift up this small piece here. This is another St. Francis. This was probably more made not for not as an artist, although the person that did it was an artist, but probably for for sale. This was done in Assisi, in the city of Assisi, by an artist named Ruffinelli. He has a studio in Assisi, and I call your attention to the shape, suggesting that there's more reaching out, the fact that the nimbus bleeds off the page here, or bleeds off the item, the stigmata on his hands, the nimbus, the symbolic bird, again indicating that it is St. Francis, the world-weary expression of what? Love, simplicity, acceptance? Hard to know. When the medium cannot contain the art, which you have here, one message is clear. There's more. There's more. I'll pass this around. This piece right there, that one, yes. This is a printed verse in this particular one, 1 Samuel. You have come against me with sword and spear and dagger, but I have come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts. This is David, here, small, and this is Goliath. Actually, it looks like David versus the Transformer here. The message here is you may think that might makes right, when in reality it's reverse. Right makes might. I love the contrast. David is this big, Goliath is this big. Both in size and simplicity. This is a very simple David. And of course, an overcomplicated Goliath. And it looks to me like it's a comment on the military-industrial complex. Goliath is all girded for war here, and David comes at him, of course, with the sling. I won't grab this particular painting, but it's back there, and I would call your attention to it. It's done by an artist named August Mulder. It's the one to the left there in front of the window, and it's Christ healing the lame man. It's very similar to the wood carving that we saw of Christ healing. Here, Christ is standing more upright, and it's a different take on a familiar story. This story only appears in the Gospel of John. This is the infirm man who lacked the strength necessary to go into the water when it bubbled up as a sign of its potential curing capacity. So Christ encounters him unrecognized, and the man sought from Jesus assistance maneuvering his way down to the pool. Instead, Christ cures him, telling him to take up his bedroll and walk, which he does. Now, it happened that this was on the Sabbath, which made carrying one's bed a crime. The infirm man here is little more than a skeleton sketched out. Christ is similarly blurry, yet at the same time he's reaching, he's touching, he's connecting, he's healing. It lacks the intimacy of the carving, where they're more curved together. This is a little bit more upright, and there's a little more distance to Jesus here. Mulder depicts a more hierarchical scene, more emphasis on the healer than on the healed, with a crutch keeping all but the healing hand on the right half of the print. Mulder focuses on the important elements of the story, not the bubbling waters, not the surrounding crowd, not the setting itself, but rather the power and the placement of the hands outstretched. I'm going to, thanks, man. Call your attention to what are called the santos, the three men there carved. They're facing Steve today, but the one in the middle, again, St. Francis. The ones on the outside, one is St. Paul, and one is St. Iago, or St. James. James was the patron saint of Spain. He's the brother of John and the son of Zebedee. He traditionally preached in Spain after working in Jerusalem. James was beheaded then by Herod. He is the only apostle whose death is recorded in Scripture. His symbol is the sword of martyrdom. So this is the sword of martyrdom. And of course, having the name at the bottom indicates who they are. So you don't need to feel this, but these two were done around the same time, perhaps even by the same artist. This is done by a different artist, and it's much lighter. It's a lighter wood. These are much more substantive, but they make a nice trio. As I point out, Lutherans don't do saints very well. We just have never kind of reveled in the saints. We have to go to our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters to capture these wonderful saints. Next one I want to point out, and Penny, if you would bring it over, is the Madonna and Child, which is the middle, kind of under the clock there. This is the traditional green and red of Christmas, with blue, the color most often chosen for Mary. Usually if there's a blue color, we're talking Mary. We're looking through the keyhole here. There's a keyhole shape with Christ child held somewhat at a distance. Madonna is a representation of Mary, either alone or with child. These images are central icons for both Catholic and Orthodox churches. The word Madonna comes from Madonna, which means my lady. No image permeates Christian art as much as the image of Madonna and Child, and there are several throughout the room. Here, Mary wears this reflective expression of concern. Her eyes are either down or out. She's not looking heavenward for the world, for her son. Perhaps foreshadowing the Holy Week, there's a crude cross etched on her forehead, as you can see. Mimicking the Italian masters, the infant is given facial features not of a child, but rather of a small man, with the blue of Mary's sleeve becoming one with the child's wrap. The simplicity of the scene is dramatized by the blackness of the backdrop with a prominent nimbus in red. And you can see that in both cases. Thank you. And Penny, if you would grab that small, well, I can do it, thank you. This piece. We talked a little bit about this piece earlier. This is a small, simple, but I think powerful object. This is Peter being saved by Christ. It's carved. It was probably carved in Africa because these are African disciples. And you can see because of their hair, it's an African Christ, and it's distinctly African. The hair is a giveaway. And I can pass this around. The story is a well-known one. It's from Matthew 14. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him on the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he dismissed them, he went up on the mountainside to pray. Later that night he was alone. The boat was already a considerable distance from land. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking in the lake. When the disciples saw him walking in the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost." Jesus said, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter said, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink and cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." This is an asymmetrical piece. You've got a lot of people huddled over on one side. 13 men, 11 crowded into a boat, one being lifted out of the sea by his master. Some on the boat are rowing, one is pointing, several are looking away, one is shielding his eyes, unable to take in the action. To an extent, they are all anxious bystanders. Meanwhile, Christ stands erect, in calm and complete control of the situation. Note, he is not in the center of the carving, but rather commands the scene as he commands the water from his position on the far edge. This is asymmetrical, yet it's balanced. The Pentecost one, Penny, that would be the long horizontal, or the vertical one there, the second from the right. This is, again, a Pentecost story. When the day of Pentecost came, this is from Acts 2, they were all together in one place. Suddenly this sound of wind came from heaven and filled the whole house they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. I am particularly fond of the way the artist here has captured the violent wind surrounding the central figure, a male, perhaps a black male, with swirling, slashing strokes, while the Spirit, in the form of a tongue of fire, rests atop his head. It's a powerful piece. Powerful piece. Thank you. I want to show you this magnificent item. This is probably 130 years old. Anybody know what this is? This is a clerical collar. This was worn by Norwegians and Danes. And of course, Claus Clausen was both a Norwegian and a Dane. I mean, he was Danish by blood, but Norwegian in terms of who he brought over to the United States. This is a collar that was used by a pastor in Minnesota, a Norwegian. And it symbolized that he was an educated person. It also symbolized that he had a higher calling. This collar reflected he was set apart from the world. The collar also distinguished between those who had an education versus the Howdy people, which believed in empowered laity. Lay people in the Howdy church could be teachers and preachers, not in the Norwegian state church. You had to be educated. And so this collar represented you were an educated person. So this is, and as Mary and I were talking the other day, the tin is probably as historic as the collar itself. You can see a little sweat staining on the collar, and I was going to model it the other day, but my glasses got caught in the way. And so it's clear the necks have gotten larger over the course of time than those thin-necked Norwegian pastors had a number of years ago. Penny, would you bring me that item, the spire of the church that is on that table?
Not the bobble.
Right, not the bobblehead. I'll get to the bobblehead in a moment. This is from the Basilica Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. I did not buy it there, although we've been there, we've seen it. This is Gaudi, G-A-U-D-I. His life work was this magnificent Sacred Family chapel, or cathedral. Well, it's called a cathedral, but technically it's a basilica. They do not have the bishop's seat there. Pope Benedict in 2010 formally made it a basilica. It's not yet a cathedral. The church has been being built since 1882, and its proposed end date is 2026. So we'll have to go back, you know, and see it in its completed status. And there are wonderful Latin terms here, excelsis, gloria, written on it. This is a piece of pottery. It's initial on the bottom. I like it very much. I got it long after I saw the building, and now having seen the building, I appreciate it, and I'd like to go back and see it again at some point. I also want to show you this little piece, which is very clever. This was made by a Latin American artist, carver, and it is the four evangelists: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, both sides. So it's, you know, I mean, it's representations of these four people done twice, and it folds up. So it's sort of got its own traveling, you know, traveling nature here. And I assume that at one point, if you really wanted to, you could kind of latch it and take it with you. So it's traveling with the four evangelists. It's a nice piece, and you can see it from any angle. Just a few more that I wanted to share with you here, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the icon, the middle piece there, right there, yeah. The icon is the most characteristic form for the Eastern churches. It's usually an unframed panel of relatively small size, intended as an aid to contemplative worship. In the home, it would become a center of individual and family devotion. The absence of any show of emotion emphasizes the distance between the artist and the sacred. Quiet faces with eyes whose steady gaze seem to be directed into another world speaks of an eternity of faith where time and change have lost all significance.
I noticed the baby looks like a small man.
The baby, again, a small man. You know, there's a school that says, we don't do babies, we do small people. And that's certainly part of this. This dark painting right there, it's like an etching, that one back there. This is a very interesting piece. This was an Iowa artist. It's from the book of Genesis, 14th chapter. It's I practice pronunciation. It's King Melchizedek, serving as a priest to his kinsman, his relative, who is Abram or Abraham. He comes to Abraham after a great battle in which Abraham incurred blood guilt. So Melchizedek, his ministry in this situation is to perform a purification ritual, which every warrior would have to help the returning warrior deal with their blood guilt. We don't have that now, and maybe that's why we have post-traumatic stress, you know. This was Genesis 14. He performs this purification ritual with bread and wine, foreshadowing, of course, the bread and wine of the Eucharist. So this is a powerful story from Genesis 14. It's a dark piece, and so you're going to probably have to get up to it to see. But you can see there his Abraham and the king here. So, lest you think this is all just grim and serious, I want to point out that there are several attempts at what amounts to Christian humor here. Not sacrilege, just humor. The Whipple paintings, and there are two of them. This one and this one. Whipple was a fellow who fought in the Second World War. He's still living, but he's no spring chicken. I think he's about 100 years old. He's known throughout the world for what's called Whipple's, I gotta get this pronounced right, Whipple's Wimples. His paintings are of nuns from that he encountered in Italy during World War II. He was an army journalist stationed in Italy, where he was introduced to the Daughters of Charity, which was originally a French order of nuns organized by St. Vincent de Paul in 1633. Whipple was drawn to their unique and fanciful headpieces known as wimples. Is that what they're called, Mary? Are you familiar with them? Wimples.
Yes.
So you have Whipple's wimples here. And so he pokes fun of these sisters in an intriguing way. He loved their serene and unruffled nature, the movement through the chaos of the streets of Rome during wartime. He got to know some of these sisters personally and observed that despite the work that revolved around pain and suffering and the like, these nuns were positive, they were determined, they were lighthearted, occasionally mischievous and humorous. And so here in this painting, you see the shadow right here of it looks like a priest off in the background, while these sisters are looking at paintings of clowns and seemingly enjoying it, although we get their backs to us. In this one, they're on the beach. They leave their big boots, looks like cowboy boots, on shore, and there's a bottle here. I don't know what's in the bottle, but again, he's tweaking the nuns just a wee bit. The other attempt at humor, we have the Santoses here, the Santos, the carvings of these saints, but we also have, well, now it's Martin, yes. We also have the Martin Luther bobblehead, you know, and again, this is an attempt, so it's not, yeah, that's right. You know, he's explaining the 95 Theses, even as we speak here. So this is not high art, obviously. This is a light-hearted, humorous example of the man who began a new strain of Protestant belief now almost 500 years ago. I wanted to come back to Whipple for just a second. I wanted to see if he was, you know, widely held by people and what have you. And so I went to a website and it said, a partial list of his collectors are John Wayne, Jonathan Winters, Irma Bombeck, Buddy Hackett, Frank Sinatra, Lady Bird Johnson, Red Skelton, Phyllis Diller, and Henry Fonda. And I said, they're all dead. You know, so maybe that's why I found these too. I mean, maybe the estate made them available. The last painting I want to talk about is the one closest to the door there. It's by an artist who died in 2011. His name was Irving Ammon, A-M-E-N. It looks like Amen, but it's Ammon. He was born in New York City. He began drawing at the age of 4. He was a remarkably prolific artist. He was taken with Michelangelo and Michelangelo's masterpieces, and then took many years to define his own style. He did a number of mural projects. He was a very prominent artist. He taught classes in sculpting and printmaking. He was affiliated with Notre Dame for a while. His commissions include a Peace Medal in honor of the Vietnam War, 12 stained glass windows in Bexley, Ohio, which I hope to see in a couple weeks when I'm out there. He's probably the most famous artist in this collection. This is an Irving Ammon, and he was Jewish in faith, but he did a lot of Christian art. A remarkable man. So thank you, Penny. Let me close with a quote, and then we will have a chance to talk about any of the art that you want to talk about, or any of the observations that you would like to make. I'd like to close with a quote from the artist Paul Gauguin. Gauguin said, "This is the only means there is to ascend toward God, namely to do as our divine master himself does, to create." Thank you for helping create a fun experience for me here today. I now want to look at these artworks more closely with you, and most certainly to hear your thoughts. Again, I'm pleased that you came, that you were able to join us, and I'm very grateful for your attentiveness this afternoon. Thank you very much.